We've been exploring the theme of being of perfect strangers. And when we thought about this topic, we thought we're leading up to Easter. Jesus often gathered people around him, close to him, his disciples that he spent a lot of time with. But we also do have these chance encounters, these moments where a stranger came to talk to Jesus, or Jesus went and approached a stranger. And every time that happened, something amazing happened in that person's life. And so over this month, hopefully you've been blessed by the sermons as we've explored a few different people that have encountered Jesus. And today is someone that is a wealthy man, a man that has encountered Jesus and been changed by him. And so if you have a Bible, we're going to explore the Gospel of Luke, a gospel or a biography of the life of Jesus written from the perspective of a doctor, a wealthy man who has a lot of education, a lot of experience, and a lot of good reputation. And he writes the story of Jesus, and perhaps he may never have met Jesus in his life, but he met someone who did meet Jesus and wanted to write this story down for posterity. And so we're going to explore this story in Luke chapter 19 today. Luke chapter 19, beginning in verse 1. I'm a bit of a high flyer in that I like to fly around all over the place. I don't know if that's the proper term to use, but I enjoy catching planes. But I do hate heights. Anyone else in here that hates heights? Yeah, okay, a few of us. It's a horrible experience when you're standing up on a roller coaster looking down and getting that vertigo. I hate that feeling, but I really enjoy travel. I like going to faraway places. So flying is this love-hate relationship. I enjoy to go far, but I hate the feeling of being thousands of meters into the air. Now, Dari and I have done a bit of traveling over our time together. When we first were at college, we would come back for a few trips in between semester break just to take a time off, and we didn't want to do the drive up, so we'd catch a flight, and often we'd go from Newcastle, sometimes from Sydney. But in this one particular trip, run-of-the-mill, we were thinking it would be a good experience. We were flying from Brisbane back to Newcastle. And around this time, it's about 2015, so we're looking about 10 years ago, there was something new coming to the domestic airport. It was the first pilot store that they were opening up, and it was supposed to launch there. And I've heard a lot about it. I heard how delicious these treats were. It was Krispy Kremes. Krispy Kremes was kicking off around this time, and I was naturally thinking, as the sweet tooth, I would like to try the crispiest of creams. I want to check this place out. So Dari and I, we booked our flight. We arrived early. I love to be extra early. I just have this fear that I'm going to miss my flight. And so we're there early. We've checked in. Our bags are in. We're walking around the terminal. We find Krispy Kreme. We say, okay, we're going to come back. We'll just check where our gate is, kind of acquaint ourselves. We know we've got lots of time, and we'll make our way back to Krispy Kreme, which we do. So we end up getting there, and there's a massive line. And I'm thinking, I can handle this. I really want to try Krispy Kremes, that original glazed manna from heaven. And so we line up, and there's about 6 or 7 people in front of us. Dari's kind of, having a good time, and usually I'd be the one stressing, but I'm feeling good because we're all checked in, ready to go. We get to the front of the line, we get our donuts, they'll ask us if you want a thick shake. I'm like, yeah, I'm already entering down the path of guilt. I might as well go all the way. Chuck a drink on that one. So we're walking back to our gate so that we can get on our plane. And the words are sitting on the screen, which fill my heart with fear. Gate closed. Man, did I freak out. I run to the gate. I say, lady, is there any way that we could get onto the plane? She's like, I'll have to check. So she pulls up the phone. And to this day, I think she was messing with us. I don't think anyone was on the other side. She's like, hey, we've got 2 more. Can we get them? Oh, yeah, okay. Ooh, yeah, all right. We'll let them in. Hangs up, opens the door. Apparently, they had to do something to open the door again. Or I don't know. They're really hamming it up for us, making it seem like as if it's the worst thing in the world that we're a couple minutes late. So we get onto the plane. And in this moment, I didn't really process what I was walking into. Because for some reason, in Virgin Airlines omniscience and knowledge, they've designed it in such a way that you have to walk past the business class people and for some reason our tickets on this particular day were right at the back. And usually that's fine because you load up from both ends, but as we step onto the plane, there's only one and we're coming from the front and we're well towards the back. you step around that corner, and usually it's nothing, but this particular day, there was a lot of scowling faces. It's like, what is going on? Why are you making us late? That's like the thoughts are crossing my head. Everyone's silent, of course. They're just looking at you. I'm pretty sure some of them were like shaking their head in derision, like, oh man, look at this guy. But the worst part of it all was because I didn't have time to dig into my Krispy Kreme and my thick shake, this is what it looks like when I'm walking down the aisle. Hello, good to see you. Dari, Dari's smart. Where is she? She's right behind me. So I'm blocking the view because it's one person lane, and we're walking down, and I feel like the biggest heel. I feel like the dumbest person on that plane. I probably was. I'm walking down, and I have to go all the way to the back. I was that guy, right? Like I was the guy that made everyone late. Well, a couple minutes late, and I did it because of donuts. Like what a glutton, what a greedy guy. I was that guy. I felt ashamed. I don't know, I still haven't asked Dari to this day what she was feeling, but maybe she was kind of like using me as a shield, running like this guy, right? What a fool. Shame is something that maybe you've experienced, but maybe it's something that we haven't put words to. Shame is something that can really take control of our life and even guide our decision making as human beings, as Australians. There's an author I read from the New York Times. His name's David Brooks. He talks a bit about our cultural time, our moment in history, and he talks about that there is within us a desire to be embraced and praised by the community. It's intense. We want the community around us to value us, accept us, and pull us in as one of their own. People dread being exiled. The condemnation is to be excluded. Moral life is not built, as we might think, on what is right and what is wrong, but instead on what does it take for me to be included and what does it take for me to be excluded. And I want to avoid everything that might keep me from being excluded and live in this place where I can be included. Traditional shame cultures, particularly Asian countries tend to value have a shame and honor system. To have shame in your life is the opposite of being honored, to save face. But in our modern culture, we're moving towards a new type of shame culture. And this is what David Brooks says. He says the opposite of shame today for your average American, Canadian, Australian is not saving face, but to be a celebrity. To be someone that has followers, to be attention grabbing, excessively, aggressively so, to make sure that you're unique no matter what, and that you will be known and loved by people. So, what does that result in? Well, like Jacob walking down that aisle, we can feel this perpetual insecurity, and I did feel very insecure for the rest of that flight. I was glad I was at the back and hoping no one would pass me, but I still did see people cross my eyes every now and then and kind of stare at me. I felt like I had done something so terrible in that moment. I was ashamed. But today, the standards for a lot of us, whether we're in high school or whether we're shopping at Woolies, is that we want to be included by the crowd. And to have their judgment is the worst possible thing. In past eras, in past generations, the thing that guided us was an internal lawyer. Is that the right thing to do? You shouldn't be doing that. That's wrong. But now, as David Brooks suggests, what guides us is not an internal lawyer, but an internal grandma. Are you sure you should be wearing that? What would people think? You shouldn't do that. I can't believe I said that. These are the words that guide our decision making. Now, I know there's lots of grandmas that are very lovely people, but we're talking about the caricature of the challenging person that says you should be ashamed of yourself. That's the internal decision-making principles. Let me show you two examples. You might have heard of a man by the name of Jeffrey Epstein. Has anyone heard of him? Yeah, he seems to take up a lot of news space, even though he's dead. But today, the thing that everybody's worried about is not Jeffrey Epstein himself, but nobody wants to be associated with Jeffrey Epstein. And so we're seeing on the news come up that like this book is being studied. Who are the people that hung out with Jeffrey? And to be in that book is really, really bad. Because in effect, you're going to be named and shamed. I know when I first started hearing about this recently, it was whether Leonardo DiCaprio had spent time with Epstein. And the questions were coming up. Bill Clinton? Was he hanging out with him? What is happening here? This is a name and shame culture. It is basically, if you are of the wrong type, if you spend time with the wrong people, you are going to be part of the problem. and you must be canceled, excluded. That's our culture right now. Cancel culture is the most fearsome thing to a person who wants to be a celebrity. Another name that might bring back some memories is Lance Armstrong. Heard of that fella? Not the dude that went to the moon. I got them mixed up. Definitely not a sporty guy. I can assure you of that. Lance Armstrong. When he was at the height of his career, he was looking at 7 consecutive Tour de France titles and 1 Olympic medal. That's a lot of skill. And there were even accusations brought up that this man had been doping and was cheating, and he went to court and even won. But it was eventually, the truth came out that he was cheating, and as a result, all of those titles and I believe the Olympic medal were stripped of him. And this is what the terminology was. This is what they said. Not that he did a wrong thing, that he's broken a law or he's broken a commandment or he's done the wrong thing, he's been guilty, but instead these were the terms. He brings the sport into disrepute. Translation, Lance Armstrong, he's a shameful person to the sport of bicycle riding. So now, we have to kind of take this mindset, which we understand very well, and think this is not an unusual thing. This is not a new story. People have experienced shame and honor before. And as we dive into Luke 19, I want you to think about what is the experience that Zacchaeus is going through. What is he experiencing? But I think as I listen to these experiences in our modern day, but also the story of Zacchaeus, we know what it feels like to bring shame to God. We know what it feels like to let God down. We wish that we were better. We wish that we could have done the right thing in that moment, said the right thing at that time, and we know that fear and that hurt that it's brought. We know what it's like to let him down, but I'm here today to assure you that the God who you may feel you've ashamed and brought down is not a God that gives up on the shameful. God does not throw the shameful to the side. God does not abandon the ones that have shamed him, but instead, God will call them. God will lift them up, and I want to explore one place where Jesus did that and showed that perfectly. Luke chapter 19, beginning verse 1. Luke chapter 19, beginning verse 1. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. He made his way through the town. His intention was not to stay here on this particular trip. He was passing through, and there was a man by the name of Zacchaeus. I have a bit of a gripe. Sometimes people say it's Zacchaeus, but I think Zacchaeus is probably more accurate to the Hebrew speaking way. It just sounds better on my ear. So if you feel a bit of a grating on your ear, I'm sorry, but that's just the way I pronounce it. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he had become very rich. He tried to get a look at Jesus, and so because he was too short because of the crowd, he did something. He ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. It's probably coming to you now. There's a song in your head, which if you've spent time in church for a little while or you know the story, this is very familiar territory. But I hope that you'll see something a little bit different here, because this is what's fascinating in the next couple verses. When Jesus came by, remember, he didn't stop at Jericho. So he spent no time there. He's merely passing through. He looked up into the tree at Zacchaeus and called him by name. Zacchaeus, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. There's a problem for me as I listen to this story. How in the world does Jesus know Zacchaeus? Zacchaeus is somebody that lives in Jericho. Jesus didn't stop in Jericho. And we could say Jesus knows all, but I think Jesus limited himself as a human. And so there's something here that I find that we're missing. First, notice this. When Zacchaeus came to see Jesus, it says that he was too short to see over the crowd. But the problem here is that rich people, people of dignity and wealth and honor, they don't need to worry about crowds. If a crowd is in the room and somebody of reputation comes in, most times the crowd will scatter. This is somebody worthy of seeing Jesus. You saw it with the young rich ruler. There were the lawyers that came to Jesus. The crowds would scatter and they would have access. But not Zacchaeus. He's rich, and it says he's short, but there's more happening here. There's something else that's happening here. He might be disadvantaged in height, but that doesn't mean that he can't have access to Jesus because of that. I think what's happening here, and this gives the clue, is that he ran ahead. Another thing that a person of reputation doesn't do, he runs ahead and he climbs a sycamore fig tree. Now, I'm not a botanist, but I did quite a bit of Googling of what a sycamore fig tree looks like. Do any of you have one in your home? Nope. So have you seen one before in your life? Maybe. Some of us are shaking their head. I didn't. So I had to Google. And as I discovered, this is what most botanists talk about this tree, what it looks like is it's a low-lying tree. That means when it grows, it doesn't have a large trunk and then you start seeing leaves like a palm tree. Instead, it has got a short trunk and then it starts to spread out and it's very, very leafy. The foliage creates this dense cover all around the tree. And so Zacchaeus is smart. People don't like him. People want to stay away from Zacchaeus. Nobody talks about Zacchaeus, right? Like, stay away from him. He climbs the tree that is the most covered in the hope that he will see Jesus coming. And he doesn't want anybody else to know because of his lifestyle. He's bringing public shame if he tries to talk to Jesus. Zacchaeus understands what it's like to have a heart filled with shame, regrets for the choices that he's made. And in his experience, the people of Jericho held him at arm's length. Don't come near me, Zacchaeus. You stay away. What would it feel like to know that his mistakes had kept him away from God and from the people he loves? But think about it in our own life. Who amongst us haven't tried at one time in their life to cover their shame, to hide their guilt, to keep the things in their heart, rather than to expose them, to face them, and to make up for them? We've all felt the flaws in our own heart, but in my experience, when I notice the flaws in my own heart, my first response is to point it out in other people. Every argument I've ever had was all about how I'm doing fine and that person is the problem. We love to exaggerate the problems in other people rather than looking inwards to myself. And often, we may find ourselves flying into rage, having an argument to avoid the reality that maybe there was something that I did wrong in this situation. Maybe I could have pursued a better communication style. Maybe I could have pursued forgiveness or reconciliation. Instead, shame causes us to double down. Shame creates toxic relationships, doesn't it? You know what I'm talking about. You've probably felt what I have. You've probably experienced what I have. Shame can break relationships apart. Why? Because of what's happening in here. Not that person. I mean, that person could have problems. But I know one advice from a good mate of mine. He always says to me, often the things that people critique in you is the things that they see in their own heart and in their own life. Shame kept Zacchaeus, an outsider, stuck in his habits of corruption and of oppression, but it also kept the city of Jericho in hatred and in rejection of Zacchaeus. So let it be known, I think this is clear. The story is showing us something very important here. When we live in habits of shame and of our mistakes, it breaks apart community. It makes our families disintegrate. It makes our churches fragment. Instead, we need a better way. Remember, I asked the question, how did Jesus know his name? There's something I think that's very clear here that could be missed just from reading it. How did Jesus know this guy's name? Well, the clue comes during the conversation. Zacchaeus quickly climbed down, and Jesus invited himself over. I mean, this is someone who loves Zacchaeus, so he wants to be close to Zacchaeus. But listen to the response of the people. It says the people were displeased. In another version, it says the people saw this and began to mutter. Like, oh, Jesus, look who Jesus is hanging out with. Oh, does he know Zacchaeus? I mean, he passed through Jericho. He might have missed the fact that he's a cheat. He's a thief. Jesus is hanging out with Zacchaeus. Oh my goodness, what does that say about Jesus? He's gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner. I think the reason why Jesus knew Zacchaeus' name is it wouldn't have taken long when they realized who Zacchaeus was and what he was doing in that tree hiding out, that the insults started to fly. Ha! Look, it's Zacchaeus. Look at the little midget in the tree, right? Like, they're hurling insults, they're saying rude things, and Jesus hears all this and starts thinking, what is going on here? Who is this person? He turns and sees Zacchaeus in the tree, and immediately he understands. Their expectation was not that Jesus would say, I'm coming to your house. Instead, their expectation was Jesus is going to give this man a scathing rebuke. He's going to tell him off Put him in his place, Jesus. Go on, Jesus. Tell him to repent. Tell him to purify himself. Tell him to get his life in order. I'm sure they were excited for a fire and brimstone sermon from Jesus that afternoon. That would have resulted in applause. Jesus would have been loved by everyone. The crowds would have hailed him the Messiah maybe at that very moment. He was doing the king's work. That's why they grumble when instead he says, I'm coming to hang out with you, Zacchaeus. I'm coming over to your place. Where do you live? Are you down by Peter's joint? Yeah, I'm coming. Yep, I'll be right down there. And instead, man, the crowd just gets angry. And so they start to do something that crowds do. When you don't follow the party line, they grumbled. They started to do character assassination. They started to point their attention towards Jesus. The fear of shame, may I encourage you to think about this, the fear of shame can prevent you from doing so much good. The fear of even being associated with someone. In Jesus' day, to be associated, to just eat at the table of a sinner was to say that you are a sinner, that you encourage this lifestyle and you're just one of the same. Jesus knew this. Jesus knew this very well, but instead he pushed through it. I remember talking to a pastor down in Victoria. She's born and raised in America, but has moved over to Australia. Her name's Jean Ha, and she said to me something that I've never noticed of Australian culture. She sees it, when you go overseas, you get this culture shock. She observed something which I have stolen from her, and I really appreciate it. You know this tall poppy syndrome thing we talk about in our culture, that we make sure that you don't get too high or we'll cut you down. We all need to be equal. You know what that also does? That also keeps us all uniform. It makes sure that we don't stand out too much. Shame can prevent us from stepping out and doing and showing love to people who the rest of the crowd has said, no, you don't do that. You don't treat that person that way. That's not the way to do it. And so she pointed this out to me, that often in our culture, we would be afraid and ashamed to even mention the name of Jesus to our friends in fear that we might be that poppy that's just slightly different. We'll hide it for years and years. I know growing up as a Christian, and I used to go to church and kind of do this quick pretend walk like I'm not going to church. And then as I got near to my church, this is down in South Brisbane. It's a busy part. There's lots of cars driving past. I remember, a 15, 16-year-old, and I'm thinking, I hope no one sees me from school. I hope that nobody's going past. And I lived in Logan, which was 40 minutes away. But I was afraid. I don't want to be that guy that everyone knows is a Christian at school. I went to a public school, Brown Staines High School, as we called it. It's Browns Plains, but the uniform was brown, so you know how they got to that creative name. So Brown Staines High School, that's where I used to go, and I'm ashamed. Will people see me here? I remember installing the app on my iPhone for the Bible and then deleting it after church in case someone looked at my phone during the week. This is genuine feelings of a teenager. I don't want to stand out because what happens if I do? They're going to mock me. They're going to ridicule me. Will they be my friend? What happens if we see something good that's happening and we don't pursue it? What if we see something bad that's happening and we don't confront it? Jesus is not afraid of what the crowd says. And I get it. I've done it. I've followed the crowd. But this is an opportunity for us to recognize that maybe sometimes we do need to be that voice, to make a fuss, to challenge, and to lift up the name of Jesus wherever we might be. So Jesus did go to his house. Jesus did turn up. Even though the people complained, it says that he quickly climbed down, Zacchaeus quickly climbed down, and Jesus took him to his house, and there was great excitement and joy. Jesus still turned up, even though the crowds fussed, even though there would be a whole question about this. And what Jesus does next is even more crazy. Jesus never mentions anything about his lifestyle to him. But Zacchaeus stands up and says, I have something to say. I will give half of my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. Now, Jesus teaches often, but on this particular circumstance, on this particular occasion, you don't see anything about his teaching. I don't think he did. I'm just going to read scripture plainly. I don't think Jesus needed to preach a sermon. I think Zacchaeus already knew what was in his heart, and I think everybody who walks in those doors, if you are a human being like me, that you will recognize that there's something in your heart that separates you from God. We don't need to go over that. You know it. What you don't know is the love of God. What I need to absorb deeply is, what does God do with me when I'm in this state of shame? That's what I need to spend time on, because this is where is the story leading to. Jesus responded at this moment, "Salvation has come to this home today. For this man has now shown himself to be a true son of Abraham." A true son of Abraham. I think there would have been a pause at this moment. I think if there was a maid working in there, she would have dropped her cutlery and her plates. What did he say? I reckon the disciples, if they were muttering at this moment, went dead silent. Did he just call Zacchaeus a son of Abraham? You got to be kidding me. I'm sure there would have been questions at this point. Maybe it led to a long Bible study that evening. Jesus calls him a position of high honor. Do you remember the name of the son of Abraham? Do you remember his name? Isaac, Jacob. These are the people that God worked through. And Jesus called Zacchaeus Isaac, the son of promise. Yeah, that's the sound, right? There was no sound right then. And hopefully you're feeling awkward in that moment, because that's what I think would have happened here. But Jesus loves to do this. Jesus takes the miserable, the beaten, the outcast, the forgotten, the abandoned sons, and calls them home. And calls them sons. I'm sure a few days earlier, Jesus was in that room where it says that sinners and tax collectors were gathered with Pharisees and religious leaders, and Jesus told the three parables that you know very well. The parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, and the parable of the lost son. Think about that story now through the lens of Zacchaeus' eyes. A son who says to his father, "Father, I don't want anything to do with you. Give me my inheritance. I'm leaving." A father that doesn't retaliate, but says, "Yes, here you go. I'll sell this part of the land. It's yours." He leaves and goes as far away as possible from his father. He spends it all on the worst kind of lifestyle. Gambling. Who knows? There was probably women involved. There was who knows what else. Partying. Lavish living. Prodigal living. And in the end, where does it lead him to? The pig pen. But it's there in the pig pen as he's gathering up food to give to the pigs and realizing, I'm hungry, and starts eating and consuming the food for the pigs, the most shameful place in society. He remembers that his father's servants, they have a much more honorable position. His father's servants, they get to eat from the table with his dad. What is he doing here in this pig pen? And so he picks himself up and he walks home and he's gathering his thoughts and he's memorizing, "Father, I've sinned against you and against heaven. If possible, please forgive me and treat me as one of your hired servants." So twice he's memorizing, he's going over it, he says those lines, and then as he approaches, he sees over the hill, and who's that waiting for him? We know this story well. Think about it now through the lens of Zacchaeus. He's watching and he sees his father. If shame is filling my heart, what's dad going to do to me? What's dad going to do to me? And he starts running. Dad's running towards me. Why is dad running towards me? The Deuteronomic law said that an obedient son must be taken and stoned. He has brought shame on the family. He sees his father running. But notice what his dad does. His dad runs to him. His dad covers him with his best robe. He puts the sandals on his feet, the ring on his finger. He's covering his shame. He's taking away his shame. And at his own expense, he shames himself. The father is willing to make himself shameful so that his son will not be taken and stoned. That the town will know that he is accepted, he is embraced, and he's part of the family. Zacchaeus would have heard this story, I'm sure. He would have heard it many times. It would have filled his heart to know that there is a God that loves him, that says to him, "You've stuffed up, come home." Jesus sees us even when we stuff up. Even if we think the whole community is against me, Jesus still says, "I'm coming to your home." Even if there is a time where we found ourselves going on the internet, watching those videos again that we feel ashamed about, Jesus says, "I'm coming to your home. I'm coming home to you again." When you fought with your parents for the 50 millionth time and you say, "Why am I still fighting with my parents? Why am I still fighting with my sibling? Why can't I and my wife or I and my husband just work things out?" You feel ashamed. Jesus says, "I'm coming to your family. I'm coming to your family today." We want to hide, but Jesus says, I'm welcoming myself in. Why? Because he doesn't want to leave you there. He doesn't want to leave you in this state of brokenness. When we say, how do I continue, Lord? He says, just let me in. I'm coming to your house today. And how is this all possible? How is this all possible? That Jesus can do this for you, for me, and for Zacchaeus? Well, not many days after, as we read the Gospel of Luke, not many days later, that same crowd that praised Jesus because he was following the line of what they thought was right, not many days later, Jesus was being carried by that same crowd to be put on a cross, to be stripped naked, to be slapped in the face, to be verbally mocked and insulted. Why? You don't do those things to kill someone. You do those things to shame a person. The crowds wanted to show Jesus that you're trash. You're at the bottom of the heap. God put you there. Jesus took Zacchaeus' place. Jesus took the spitting, the stripping, the slapping, and the mocking that could have and should have been directed at Zacchaeus. Jesus moved others from shame to honor by taking himself from honor to shame. Paul writes that he sat at one with the Father, united with the divinity for all eternity, and he lowered himself to the form of a man, a human, and then to the form of a servant, and then to a criminal on a cross, and then finally to death. Why? So that you and I could be lifted up. So that you and I could be honored when we have been shameful, when we have let God down. There is this message that you need to hear today. When you feel like you've let God down, can I invite you to remember, it was never up to you to lift him up. It was never up to you to bring him up. So how could you let him down? Because the one who truly put God on the throne, who truly shows us what God is like, is Jesus. It's Jesus. He's the one that demonstrated to us what God is like. And so he is saying to us, if you've stuffed up, come to me and I will show you a better way. Come to me and I will give you a second chance. I'll give you a third chance. I'll give you a 490th chance. Jesus takes your shame and gives you honor, even if you feel like you're in the pig pen today. And might I encourage us as a church to think how we, as followers of Jesus who know and believe this truth, to think how can we take the shame off of others? Why don't we sing together, family? Why don't we sing together one more song?